All right, today we're going to build a fortress, but not one with stone and mortar. We're talking about a digital fortress built with policies, technology, and, just constant vigilance. We're going to walk through the basics of cybersecurity using this exact idea: designing, building, and defending your own digital fortress. So let's dive right in and figure out why this is so incredibly important to begin with.
So we're kicking things off with this quote from Paul McNulty, a former Deputy Attorney General, because it perfectly frames what we're talking about today. Building that fortress, putting all the security measures in place, it might seem expensive, but as we're about to see, the cost of just doing nothing, of leaving your gates wide open, is so much higher.
And this really brings it all home, doesn't it? I mean, you hear about these massive data breaches almost every single day hitting companies we all use. It makes you stop and think, okay, so what's the plan here? How are these organizations actually supposed to be protecting all the information we give them? Well, that's exactly what we're here to break down.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to look at why security fails in the first place. Then, we'll dive into the blueprint for protecting everything. After that, we'll get into fortifying the front lines, the people, and the tech. And finally, we'll talk about the constant, non-stop vigilance it takes to keep it all safe.
All right, let's jump right into our first section: why security fails. See, before you can build a strong fortress, you've got to know who or what you're up against. And here's the kicker: the biggest threat? It might already be inside the walls with you.
When we think about cyber threats, we usually picture that classic image, right? Some hacker in a dark hoodie furiously typing away. And look, that's definitely a real danger. But the data consistently shows that a huge chunk of security failures, we're talking well over half in many cases, they actually come from inside, from internal actors. These are the employees, the contractors, the people who already have the keys to the castle.
So, that internal threat really breaks down into two main types. First, you've got the malicious insider. This is someone who intentionally uses their access to do something bad. The classic example is that former Equifax CIO who got convicted for insider trading after he found out about their massive breach. But then you have the other side, and honestly, this one's way more common: the negligent insider. This is the employee who doesn't mean any harm at all, but they just make a mistake. They click on a phishing link or accidentally delete a critical file. The thing is, both types of insiders can be absolutely devastating.
So let's get crystal clear on what we're actually trying to stop here. What is a data breach? Well, it's basically any security event where protected info gets compromised. And you got to look at the scope here. It's not just about your personal data, what we call PII. For a company, a breach could mean their secret sauce, their intellectual property, their customer lists. The very stuff that makes them successful is suddenly out in the open.
Okay, so we've identified the threats. Now it's time to draw up the plans. Let's move on to Section 2, the blueprint for protection. I mean, think about it. You would never, ever build a real fortress without a detailed architectural plan, right? Well, cybersecurity is exactly the same. You need a solid strategy, you need rules, and you need to know who's in charge.
This whole blueprint, it really starts from the top down. At the very peak, you have the organizational or master policy. This is where senior management basically says, hey, security is a really big deal here, and this is how we think about it. Then, flowing down from that big picture vision, you get all the issue-specific policies. These are the real nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty rules about, say, how you're allowed to use your email or the specific way you have to connect when you're working remotely. It's a clear chain, from the big idea down to the daily rules. Now, of course, this blueprint can't just exist in a vacuum. It has to follow the law. And this is where things get really tricky, especially for big global companies. You see, a security plan that's perfectly fine in the US, which uses a common law system, might actually be illegal in a lot of Europe, which is based on civil law and has totally different rules about data privacy. So the bottom line is this: your security plan has to be built on a legal foundation that respects the laws of every single place you do business.
And hey, it's not just legal challenges the blueprint has to account for. It's also got a plan for physical ones. This is what we call business continuity. What happens if the fortress gets hit by a tornado, or a massive flood, or even just a long power outage? Business continuity is the playbook for keeping the lights on, or at least the most important parts of the business running. And a huge piece of that is disaster recovery, which is all about the IT side of things, getting the computers, the servers, the digital heart of the fortress back up and running fast.
All right, the plans are drawn. It's time to start building. Let's get into Section 3, fortifying the front lines. This is where we lay the actual bricks and mortar. We're putting up the real deal defenses, and they really come in three critical layers: people, technology, and physical security. Let's start with the first, and you could argue the most important layer, the people. We've already talked about how insiders are such a huge risk. So how do you strengthen that weakest link? Well, you have to think about the entire employee journey. It starts before they're even hired, with background checks. Then, it's all about constant training to help them spot phishing emails and other threats. It's about enforcing really strict access controls, meaning you only get access to the data you absolutely need to do your job, period. And it even includes having secure procedures for when someone leaves, to make sure company secrets don't walk out the door with them. Okay, next up is our second layer, technology. And a central piece of tech defense is cryptography, basically the science of secret messages. A crypto system isn't just one thing. It's the whole package. It's the math algorithm that scrambles the data, it's the secret key that unscrambles it, and it's the set of rules for how to use it all correctly. And just like a chain, its strength is only as good as its weakest link. So is there such a thing as a perfect, a truly unbreakable technological defense? Well, in theory, yes. It's called a one-time pad. It is the only method of encryption that's been mathematically proven to be 100% unbreakable. But, and this is a huge but, the rules to make it work are incredibly demanding. The key has to be totally random, you can only use it one time, it has to be kept top secret on both ends, and it has to be at least as long as the message you're sending. So yeah, not exactly practical for your everyday emails, but it's the theoretical gold standard that everyone else is aiming for.
Okay, sticking with technology for a minute, let's talk about how our data actually gets from point A to point B. There are really two basic ways it happens. The old way is called circuit switching. Think of it like an old-fashioned phone call. A direct, dedicated line is opened up just for you, and it stays open for your whole conversation. But what we mostly use today, especially on the internet, is packet switching. This is more like the postal service. Your message gets chopped up into little pieces or packets, and each one can take a different route to get to its destination, where they all get put back together in the right order.
Okay, so inside our digital fortress, we don't just want one big open room, right? We need walls to create separate, secure areas. And in the world of networking, that's exactly what a VLAN, or a virtual local area network, does. It's a cool piece of tech that lets you group devices together logically, even if they're plugged in on different floors of the building. So you could, for example, put the entire HR department on its own secure virtual network, totally walled off from, say, the marketing department. It is an absolutely critical tool for keeping things organized and secure on the inside. And that brings us to our third and final layer of defense, the physical world. Because remember, this digital fortress, it exists in a real building. And that building needs to be secure, from the locks on the doors to the fire suppression systems. And speaking of fire, putting one out in a server room is not as simple as you'd think. You can't just grab a water hose for every type of fire. For a normal fire with wood or paper, a Class A, sure, water works. But if you spray water on an electrical fire, a Class C, you are going to have a very, very bad day. For that, you need a gas, like CO2. Knowing which tool to use for which job is absolutely essential. Okay, so the fortress is built, the walls are up, the guards are trained, the tech is in place. We're done, right? Ha! Nope, not even close. The work is never, ever finished. And that brings us to our final, critical section, the Constant Vigil. You have to understand that security is not a destination you arrive at. It's a process that never stops, a cycle of testing, watching, and always getting better.
So how do you decide which new defenses or upgrades are actually worth the money? Well, big organizations use something called quantitative risk analysis, and this formula is right at the heart of it. It all boils down to calculating something called the annualized loss expectation, or ALE. That's really just a fancy way of asking, if this bad thing happens, how much money are we going to lose over a year? So you figure out that number before you add a new safeguard. Then you figure it out for after it's in place. The difference, minus what the safeguard costs you, is its total value. If that final number is positive, it's probably a good investment.
A huge part of this constant vigil is actively searching for weak spots in your own defenses. And there are two main ways to do this. First, you got vulnerability scanning. Think of this as an automated security guard that just constantly walks the perimeter, checking every door and window to see if it's unlocked. It points out potential holes. Then you've got penetration testing. This is totally different. This is when you hire a team of good guys, ethical hackers, to actually try to break into your fortress. They don't just find potential holes, they prove whether or not those holes can actually be exploited.
And this old Russian proverb really sums up the entire philosophy of modern cybersecurity perfectly. Trust, but verify. You trust that your systems are secure, you trust that your employees are doing the right thing, but you always, always have to check. You have to verify.
And so we're left with this one final question.
that digital fortress that's protecting your data and the data of every single company you do business with, it's being attacked, tested, and pushed against every single day. So the real question is it strong enough to hold? And that, right there, is the constant, never-ending challenge of cybersecurity.